Joking.
Hey, Dog Nation, welcome into Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. My name is Brandon Adams. Glad to have you with us. Also happy to have the rest of the Dog Nation team on hand as well. Jeff Sintel, Connor Riley, Mike Griffith. A lot to talk about with you over the course of the next few minutes, and a big guy will be the big topic to kick things off here today, as Georgia got some good news when defensive tackle Jordan Davis announced he plans to return to the Dogs for the 2021 season. Obviously, one of the most pivotal members of Georgia's defense in 2020, and certainly arguably one of the top returning defensive players in the entire SEC, if not the country, for 2021. Mike Griffith, what does it mean for Georgia to get Davis back in the fold?
I think it means everything. I think it doubles their chance because it's almost like adding a 12th defender. And some people have said, well, how can one guy mean so much? And it's because there's not another player like Jordan Davis. You said it'd be one of the best players in the SEC for sure, maybe the country. When you've got someone this size that can control two gaps inside, as Jordan Davis can, get the pocket push, as we've seen him do. Remember that sack against Florida last year? Boy, they missed him against the Gators this year. This guy is a one-man wrecking machine that absolutely changes how teams scheme and plan for Georgia. There's no running between the tackles when number 99 is on there. Now, there's other guys who are good, but there's no one who can do what Jordan does on this football team. And very few players at the college football level have the size and power of a Jordan Davis, and he's only going to get better.
Connor, I love what you said about this on Dog Nation Daily this week in terms of just the unique characteristics he brings to the game as a football player.
Yeah, he's a one of one. And I think Mike really laid it out there. I don't think there's a better run defender in college football. I won't go quite as far as how this helps their national title chances, but he is a guy that I think in some of those games, against lesser teams that might be upset-minded that are very good at running the ball next year, I think that really helps Georgia in those games because he just single-handedly turns the faucet off when it comes to running the football. Georgia's had the number one rush defense in each of the past two seasons, and Jordan Davis, quite frankly, is the biggest reason why that's the case. And with him coming back next year and most of that front seven intact from what we saw this year, I know Monty Rice is moving on, and Azeez Ojulari and Jermaine Johnson as well, but I still expect Georgia to have one of, if not the best run defenses in the country next season.
Yeah, Jeff, and one of the things I said this week when I made an appearance on the Athens radio station 960 The Ref is that one of the things you can't measure about Davis' value is not only does he stop the run, I think in some cases he prevents running plays from even being called. Teams decide to go with the pass play just instead because, they know how Davis is in the middle with the beef, manning the middle there, and they know that running plays are going to be tough sledding. That's one of the things about Davis that I just think is hard to quantify, the fact that I think he actually changes the game plan for the opposing offense. And I think we've seen that when he's been healthy for Georgia really over the course of the last 3 years.
Yeah, Brendan, I just think Jordan Davis is kind of like Georgia's spirit animal for the 2021 season. And, I can give you all this gap things, how he's going to eat up two gaps and how it's going to keep the linebackers free to go downhill. And it's going to give Georgia the ability to just play guys differently in the box. All that stuff makes a whole lot of sense. But to me, he's fun. He's big. He's over the top. He's gregarious. And I think we've been saying this on these shows for the last two seasons that the guy behind him, they don't have anybody like him in the program right now. I don't know many college football teams that do. And I would say outside of the quarterback, everybody loves the quarterback, JT Daniels. He will remain the most important player on this Georgia football team because it makes Georgia, gives Georgia such a defensive identity to where they're ferocious on defense when he's up front.
Mike, you tried to quantify this a moment ago about what the actual tangible value of Davis is. The one thing I'll say is that I don't know that anyone on the Georgia roster, and this is a deep Georgia roster, even with the defensive line spot, including guys like Devontae Wyatt, who we've heard are coming back for 2021. But I don't know that anyone quite replaces what Davis brings to the table. Connor called him a kind of a player in a category of one. I'll say that I believe that he's irreplaceable in this Georgia roster. As good as Jalen Carter is, Jalen's a different kind of profile as a player. Even Devontae Wyatt, as good as he is, it's a little bit different profile as a player. In the interior of the defensive line, over the center, right there in the interior there's just really nobody who's going to step in and do what Davis was capable of doing if Davis himself was going to be here to do it.
Yeah, and that's why it's so exciting, and you say, well, why didn't he go to the NFL? And the reason why is body of work and consistency. You look at the last three defensive tackles that have been drafted in the top 10 of the last 2 years of the NFL draft. They were all consensus All-Americans. Jordan Davis hasn't even been an All-SEC guy yet. So he needs a body of work. I think he's going to have a great offseason. We know he's had some injury history. This year he was derailed. Probably had he stayed healthy, I think it's a slam dunk that he would have gone pro because he would have had an opportunity to showcase himself in more games. But as it is with him returning and going for the big prize, going for the unfinished business that JT Daniels put out, or the revenge tour that Jordan Davis put out. And his Instagram, by the way, his announcement was a little bit more colorful and pretty humorous. I don't want to give it away. But as Jeff said, spirit animal, certainly a personality, a leader. And on those tough days when Kirby's got the guys outside practicing and it's 100 degrees, Kirby loves the heat and loves the elements. You got to have somebody out there to make it fun. You got to have somebody out there that keeps everybody going and carries the fight through those tough days. And I think that Jordan has that personality to be that leader. We've talked about Richard LeCount moving on. I think Richie's been that guy. But Jordan is a leader and a guy now that kind of maybe assumes some of those vocal duties, and a guy that I think, along with JT Daniels, becomes kind of the face of the offense and the face of the defense. No disrespect to Nakobe Dean and Lewis Cine, who I expect to be big leaders, but Jordan Davis certainly is a personality we're going to see a lot more of.
Connor, I also told you this the other day that when you had that string of hashtag unfinished business tweets that came out, and Davis wasn't one of them. Speaking as a fan here for a moment, there was part of me that was like, oh gosh, is that bad news that he's not getting in on the fray when Wyatt and Cook joined JT Daniels and making that announcement. As it turns out, he was just waiting to have the stage to himself, and I think to a degree he deserves that because of how good he's been for Georgia and how important he could be returning. But it is a little bit of a sigh of relief for me knowing that when he didn't drop the other day when everybody else was, it kind of left me a little bit unsure of exactly how it was all going to play out.
Yeah, you certainly weren't the only one to express that idea that, oh boy, well, if he's not doing it now and hopping on the gravy train, that he might not be coming back at all. And we're still waiting on a few other guys to make those similar announcements. And just because they haven't made them yet doesn't necessarily mean that they're gone or coming back. It's just they're sort of taking their time deciding what they want to do. I will say one thing about Davis is, as great as he was, and I think we all recognize how good he was and good for this program and how great I think he can be in the future. In that game against Alabama, he was healthy and he was out there. And Georgia still gave up 150 rushing yards to Najee Harris, and they still gave up, I believe, 41 points in that game. So I think my overarching thing with Davis is he's going to make Georgia's defense absolutely better next year. You want him back. But as far as, for me, a national championship difference maker, I still think JT Daniels is the bigger one there. Not that anyone in here would disagree, but I just look back to that Alabama game, and as great as a player as I think we all think Davis was, Alabama's offense was so good, it didn't matter that he was out there.
Yeah, I think that might be true. And, in the case of JT Daniels coming back, Jeff, as Connor mentioned, what's so exciting about that is just how different it makes the conversation than it was a year ago when Georgia was seeking out its quarterback and seeking out an offensive coordinator. And, for a while you wondered if Buster Faulkner would be that guy. He ended up sliding over to become the analyst. There were just a lot of unknowns for Georgia in January and the early part of February. This first quarter of the year, phase one of the football calendar that Kirby Smart likes to call it, boy, the conversation around that this year is just going to feel so different. There's continuity at quarterback. There's continuity at receiver in a way that has not been true since Kirby Smart's been head coach here. And offensive coordinator we expect to come back year over year. I think that matters for Georgia. I think it'd be a huge difference. It's certainly a more fun and pleasant conversation to talk about guys that we're already acquainted with, how they'll do the following year at Georgia, as opposed to going on this national search to even figure out who Georgia's offensive coordinator and quarterback are even going to be.
Yeah, I think you guys look at it like, I'm sure the listicles will start to flow way too early, but like, are there two or three quarterback situations in the country that will be better coming into 2021 than Georgia? So you could arguably say Alabama might still find a way, but that's a tough debate. You would say Clemson, especially in the Southeastern Conference. I think Davis, like when he comes back and JT comes back, those are those two and let's all hope for it. Those are the two SEC Media Day guys. Is the third guy Nakobe Dean? Is it Kyrus Jackson? Is it Lewis Seen? They'll probably try to spread that around, but I think that's a good unit. That's just a good way to look at the Georgia football program in terms of, they've got their guy. And I know there's some contrarians out there that will say JT Daniels isn't mobile enough, can't run and make as many plays with his legs as it will take to ultimately win a natty. But you got to think the strength of the quarterback position for Georgia is as good as in any year returning in the Kirby Smart era. I think Jordan Davis gives him a huge building block for their defense. It allows guys like Nolan Smith, Adam Anderson, and Nakobe Dean to just vault themselves into contention for all SEC status because he makes everything so much better. I guess I'm kind of curious. The reporter in me wants to know, it's cool that he'll go back to Charlotte. That's that first game in Charlotte. I hope all of our viewership knows that he grew up in Charlotte. So I wonder if Georgia's first game, if that was in Dallas or if that was in Atlanta next year, whether that would have not just made so much sense for him to play the first game of his last year, his senior year in Charlotte. He grew up in Charlotte facing Clemson. I just think, knowing Davis and how highly regarded guys on this panel, guys everywhere else, it's really hard to find a guy like him, 6'6", 330, 340. I wonder what the grade was. That's just the reporter in me thinking there. Was it a top 60? Was it a top 75? Was it a top 35? I think that adds some of the elements there to it as well. But you look at Jordan Davis. I mean, he just to me seems like Georgia, and he seemed like Georgia to me for the last two seasons, even during his sophomore year. I mean, let's face it, Georgia's freshman year, remember when he slid in right around the Florida game and became the defensive tackle? Georgia has been demonstrably different ever since Jordan Davis was a fixture on this team.
Yeah, I think there's any doubt about
BA,
that.
let me say
go
this.
ahead, Mike. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
BA was actually the guy sitting next to me in the press box that really started talking about Jordan Davis before really anybody else. And I said, geez, I don't know. He's just a freshman, BA. But Brandon was really the first one on this panel to identify him. And kudos, because from the time he became a guy that started getting multiple snaps on the field, I'd agree. Now, he didn't have the same type of conditioning where he couldn't play a whole lot of plays as a freshman. But when he was out there, he was a difference maker. And we've seen this gradual buildup. So I just wanted to give BA proper credit because he was really the first guy that I heard talking about Jordan Davis.
Well, thank you, Mike. And Connor, I think one of the things that made it noticeable what Davis was doing for Georgia 2018 is because when he was not on the field, either late in the season because he dealt with some injury stuff or early in the year before his he was truly ready to play. This was not a great run stop team in 2018. Georgia had its issues on the ground. And that's one of the things that made Davis's performance as a freshman so noticeable is they did get better with him in the field. You mentioned before, statistically leading the league and stopping the run, last couple of years. Go back to 2018. That was not always a position of strength for Georgia when Davis was only a freshman. So if you want to kind of highlight what his value has been, I know there's some skeptical, non-Georgia fans who may wonder, how valuable could a guy like this really be? Just look at how Georgia was at times ineffective against the run in his freshman season before he really got going and how solid they've been against the run the last couple of years when he's truly been a fixture there.
Yeah, that LSU game in 2018, I think the Tigers rolled up 273 yards rushing in that game. That Alabama game that day, Damian Harris and Josh Jacobs both had a ton of success on the ground that really allowed Alabama to hang in that game when Alabama couldn't really throw the ball that well. So you look back at that season to really sort of identify Jordan Davis and the tangible impact he has had in the last two seasons. And bringing him back next year, Georgia's not as deep on the edge. It's at that outside linebacker position. And, you don't get better without Monty Rice back there at middle linebacker next season. But, again, there's no reason not to expect that Georgia's going to have one of the best run defenses in the country. And I know sort of spinning this forward and looking to that game in Charlotte next year, I noticed Clemson has to replace Travis Etienne. They have to replace Trevor Lawrence. Don't lose sight of the fact they also have to replace Jackson Caraman, their left tackle who declared for the draft this week. And based off what we saw last week against Ohio State, Clemson's biggest weakness right now is that offensive line. So going into that game, you do wonder if maybe now, a few weeks ago, we thought Georgia might be an underdog in that game, a touchdown or however many points that is. Now you look ahead to that, you wonder, should Georgia be favored in that game?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's been a long time since Clemson was not favoring the game. Connor, you and I talked about this before this afternoon. You probably have to go back to what, like Alabama in 2018, the last time Clemson's a point spread underdog, and you probably have to go back a number of years. I'm guessing anyway. I don't have this in front of me. I should, but I don't. You probably have to go back a number of years to find a team other than Alabama who has been a point spread favorite against Clemson.
Yeah, I think Florida State in 2014, the year after they won the national title,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the last team that Clemson wasn't a favorite against. Because that was Deshaun Watson's freshman year, I believe, and since then, Clemson has ascended to, I think, pretty clearly the number 2 team in the country behind Alabama on just a year-to-year basis.
How about it, Mike? By the way, I love to see Jeff's companion there on the screen. That's good stuff there. But how about it, Mike? Do you could you see Georgia as a favorite over Clemson to start the season?
Yeah, absolutely. Trevor Lawrence has moved on, and the JT Daniels hype is going to build. It's funny, you do these shows and you talk to these people, and everybody just acts so surprised, and it's like, no, you don't understand. You just haven't heard of JT Daniels and Jordan Davis yet. There's going to be a long off season when you buy your Athlon magazine and you run into Brandon Adams in the grocery store or Connor Riley out on the jogging trails. These are going to be the names that are going to be talked about while Jeff's walking his dog in the neighborhood. You just don't know yet. And the other fan bases, just like we don't know about other, the specifics of, well, who are the guys that are getting ready to step up at Clemson, or who are the next stars at Alabama? We're trying to do these folks a favor. It's amazing. I had this guy trolling me on Twitter for 3 hours saying, how can a nose tackle make that big of a deal? And it's like, well, you clearly haven't watched this guy play. And I can't help it that his name isn't broadcast out there as an All-American, and you don't understand who we're talking about. Or for the people that still don't really know who JT Daniels is and say, well, he was only a 500 quarterback at Southern Cal, that haven't looked deeper into this situation and recognized, wow, this was a really good guy on a really bad offensive team that year. So we're just a little ahead of the curve, and that's why people are watching and listening, BA, so they can get informed and entertained, if not by Jeff's jokes, his dog Peaches.
Hey, Jeff, jump in here with one more comment, and we got to move on.
Yeah, let me act like the ombudsman here a little bit. First of all, Brandon, we love having you back on Cover 4, and not to dispute your remarkable football acumen, but this is a little bit. Let me take up from my boy Connor here as well. Normally, in a normal year, Mike is up there in the sky suites with caviar and escargot and sparkling water, watching the game from press row. Connor and I are in the trenches on the sidelines, checking out the players early. And for anybody, that dude on Twitter, man, that's telling you about Jordan Davis, I mean, it would take a one-eyed man not to be able to see how impressive Jordan Davis is. I mean, he just jumps out at you. He dwarfs people. I mean, he was an offensive tackle, a defensive tackle in high school. And one other thing, let me act as an ombudsman here with a really quick point. I would still favor Clemson in that game because I know what Clemson has on the defensive line. Clemson's got about 3 or 4 Jordan Davises coming back next year. And that's why I think Clemson should still be favored in that football game.
Let me say this. And before we call Jeff out, remember, he was the one that predicted 7-3. And Georgia was a field goal away from being 7-3. So maybe Jeff's onto something here.
Oh, no. There you go on that. It's Mike Griffith, Jeff Sintel, Connor Riley, myself. My name's Brandon Adams. It's all the team here as part of Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. So happy to have all of you with us here as we kind of go through what has already started to be a very busy offseason for Georgia. And there's a lot more intrigue on the way. In fact, we'll talk about all of that coming up in a moment here. But first, let me thank my friends at Georgia Farm Bureau for the great work they do here across the state of Georgia. They live and work and play in communities just like the one that you're living in. And they work hard to save people money on their home, their auto, their life insurance. But they also step up and work hard to be advocates for our farming community here in the state of Georgia. For those who put food on our tables, Georgia Farm Bureau works hard to be there for them in a lot of ways. In fact, if you want to find out all that our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau are doing for Georgia's farmers and the ways in which they can save you money on your home, auto, and life insurance, check out gfbinsurance.com. That's gfbinsurance.com. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. All right, I'm not sure I could very succinctly roll through all the guys that we know are coming back to Georgia, the ones that we know are leaving. There have obviously been a lot of high-profile announcements over the course of the last few days that people have certainly been following at dognation.com. But now there is the next wave. I've already seen in our comment section about, hey, is a Rick Gilbert going to transfer in? hey, what's going on with Zamir White? When are we going to hear about his status for 2021? So there's a lot of these questions that are out there. And so, with that in mind, Connor, let me just begin with you. What do you think is next for Georgia? Next big domino to fall, whether it's a name or a subject, whatever else, what's next for Georgia in this offseason as far as you're concerned?
Well, there are two sort of divergent paths here. There are the guys that still have decisions to make, and I would say the three biggest ones that we're still sort of waiting on at this point in time are Zamir White, Jamari Sawyer, and Adam Anderson in terms of what they will do. White, obviously, a running back. James Cook coming back earlier this week. You wonder what that does for his involvement. Jamari Sawyer, well, accounts, it sounds like he's going to come back. He just hasn't crossed the I's and dotted the T's quite yet, but that's a guy Georgia actually really needs to have back, considering Trey Hill moving on earlier this week, Ben Cleveland as well, and Adam Anderson as well, a guy who, I mean, based on my opinion, had a certifiable NFL skill when it just comes to speed rush and rushing the passer this year, 6.5 sacks. And you lose Azeez Ojulari, you lose Jermaine Johnson. He's a guy I think you really need back from a depth perspective, at least, and a guy who should play quite a bit more next season. And then obviously the big, 6'5", 230-pound cloud hanging over sort of everything right now is Arik Gilbert. He is officially in the transfer portal. He teased it on Saturday, confirmed it later this week. What does he end up doing? Does he end up going to Georgia? Is it in Alabama? Maybe at Tennessee, though it sounds like Tennessee does not necessarily have its ducks in the row at the moment. So I would say those three guys that were on the 2020 team, and then what Gilbert does is probably, in my opinion, the most immediate things of Georgia fans to pay attention to, because classes at Georgia start next week. So if Gilbert wants to get enrolled, it's going to happen within that next week, I believe.
Jeff, what do you think about a Rick Gilbert situation right now?
I think it's funny. It's kind of like what we'd expect our audience to do. They've got even Schaefer, Anderson, Zamir, Salyer to look at, but then they're still thinking about that that big 150-pound turkey that would be the prize catch of the offseason in Gilbert. Classes, Connor's right. Classes do start on the 11th. There's another date to think about for those possible pro decisions, which is the 17th, which I think it's the last day or the first really strong day for them to declare. Tennessee's in a mix. Tennessee's in a wash. I'll say this again, like, you keep hearing things, and the things I keep hearing keep extending the timeline for Georgia's chances there with Eric Gilbert. But I'm going to be honest. I'm going to sound like a football man here. I'm going to sound like a logical football guy here. If he's considering a pool that includes Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, there better be some other reasons besides the obvious reasons why he wants to put on the red and black. And I'm just keeping it real.
Mike, what about the chance that there might still be a pull for him to stay at LSU? I know LSU tried to, at least the appearances, tried to keep him to go to the transfer portal. I wonder what the chances are that a school like LSU could convince him not to leave.
Well, I'll tell you, LSU is they're standing behind Ed Orgeron. You're seeing them making some moves, some coaching moves, a new offensive coordinator. That great defensive coordinator, Marcus Freeman, that I think everybody would agree really schemed Georgia up well, much better than I think anybody expected. I think Georgia had I think Cincinnati had the jump on Georgia from a scheme standpoint. I think they did a really good job of certainly getting to the quarterback and bringing a lot of different pressures. I was very impressed with Marcus Freeman. I'd be surprised if he's not the defensive coordinator at LSU, and especially now that Derek Mason's at Auburn. I wonder about a guy like Eli Ricks. How many other players could potentially leave that LSU roster? And you talked earlier about Eric Gilbert coming in, and I still think he'll end up at Georgia. I wonder if there'll be more. I wonder who the cornerback will be. Certainly with Tyson Campbell gone now, you've got to think Georgia's going to have to dip into the portal to get an experienced corner. Really surprised DJ Daniel didn't decide to come back. I mean, he would have been a starter, right? With Eric Stokes and Campbell gone. I mean, to me, if you're looking for where the bleeding is now that some of these guys have declared, it's in the secondary, and it's at cornerback specifically. That would be the area that I think we see addressed next. And then as far as what else is next is, what's the Georgia football staff going to look like? I'm not convinced that this staff is going to stay intact. In fact, I'd be surprised. I would say that there'll be over under a 1.5 changes on offense, and I'd put an over under 0.5 on defense. I'm not quite as convinced as some of my teammates that there'll be defensive attrition or replacements, but I do think on offense, I think it's a certainty.
So let me do both those things. Mike brings up two very interesting things. Let me try to take them in order before we get to any kind of coaching changes that could be on the way. There are a lot of comments in our comment section about transfer portal, cornerbacks, things like that. People obviously knowing that Georgia needs to supplement what's leaving the program. Connor, I can remember back to when Kendall Milton was a recruit. We knew that Milton and Elias Ricks were good friends. Ricks goes to LSU. I mean, do you take something like that seriously, that somebody like that, could potentially be in play for a school like Georgia? Or if it's not Ricks, to be less specific, a player that we've heard of that as a cornerback that could, potentially have Georgia in the mix?
Yeah, we had, I think, an interesting discussion, I believe, on Tuesday, sort of about tampering and what that looks like in this day and age with regards to Tyreek Stevenson and the report out of Miami that they are interested in bringing him in, even though he is not in the transfer portal yet. And I think you look at the way this is sort of done in the NBA, it's not at the team level. It's all the players because they all know each other. And in college football, the high school recruiting scene has gotten smaller and smaller. To even the point where you look this year, Mason Smith and Corey Foreman, despite being on opposite ends of the country, have a very legitimate relationship and talked about that quite often. So if it's going to happen, it's going to come not so much from the coaching staff, because you can actually get yourself in trouble if you're out there doing that. It's going to come from the player level. So having, in Georgia's case, a national recruiting sort of flavor and feel to it, where you have a guy like Kendall Milton in California, Jermaine Burton as well. You have a guy like Lewis Dean who played down in Texas. You have Nakobe Dean from Mississippi. Guys from all over the country, to where, like, hey, I even think back to Justin Fields when he went to Ohio State. Dwayne Haskins was a big reason that he ended up going there, and Haskins and Fields had a relationship prior to that. And I think that is sort of the way things are going to go in the future here. So if it is going to be cornerback X or whoever that might be, having a national sort of recruiting background and having guys from all over the country, I think can be a benefit to Georgia, landing at least someone at that cornerback position.
Jeff, I remember as a recruit, you thought Georgia had a chance to land Ricks the first time around. Now, I don't even know that he's planning on going anywhere right now. I should say that. I'm not aware of that in any form or fashion. But admittedly, the idea is certainly intriguing to me.
Well, I think it's kind of built on relationships, like Connor said, is that, the Miltons really knew Elias Ricks really well. They were trying to get him to come to Georgia and play as well. But then it's also Keely Ringo. He was another big-time cornerback outside on the West Coast. And those guys had kind of went to the same elite showcase 7-on-7 or regional type events for back when there was something called the Opening Regional and the Under Armour Regional back last century,
Back when we still left our houses.
Back last decade in the tens. But I think the name I think it sets up well for Jalen Kimber. I think it sets up well for Keely Ringo. I think it sets up well for guys like Nyland Green and Kamari Lassiter and Javon Bullard, and then potentially Terrion Arnold as well, if he decided to choose Georgia. I know we'll talk about this probably later in the week, Brandon, but I think that was kind of big how Florida lost both of its safety coach and its cornerbacks coach. And those were kind of the linking relationships for Terrion Arnold to Florida. And I think Mr. Arnold now is, to me, it sounds like Florida's got to kind of come up to the level where Georgia and Alabama are at. So, and then you got to remember Nyland Green as well. I think it's just continually revolving, Brandon. The players, I think, if you look at these group of corners Georgia would choose from, it feels like 2017 to 2018 to 2019, 2020 to 2021. You talk about Nyland, you talk about Keely, you talk about Kimber. These are, except for Eric Stokes and his blinding speed. Tyson Campbell has blinding speed as well, but you think about DJ Daniel. These are more polished, more professional, more, I guess, seasoned, highly rated cornerback material coming in to develop even further at Georgia for Charlton Warren and Kirby Smart. These are kind of, if not upgrades, they are similar athletes at Georgia, maybe bigger bodied athletes with more diverse skill sets that Georgia's bringing in to kind of replace some of these guys.
Jeff, I want to stay with you for a second because Mike also brought up the idea of the, excuse me, as I knock my phone all over the place, the what's next topic. The fact that for almost any major program, there is the possibility that you have assistant coaches that leave for a various number of reasons. Georgia possibly not immune to that over the course of this offseason. What's your outlook for assistant coaches and how all of that could play out for Georgia in terms of who's definitely coming back and who maybe's not?
Yeah, I think it's getting settled really fast, especially with NFL jobs and guys that move on. there's some dominoes that are going to hit. Like, let's say Jim Harbaugh takes an NFL job, or let's say something happens with Mullen. I think that would just ricochet across the Southeastern Conference. You see what's happening now with Carolina. I remember Derek Mason now to Auburn. I know we're going to talk about this later, but what's South Carolina going to do with its coordinator jobs now as well? I think you're hearing that T-Rob is being interviewed. The former coordinator there at South Carolina is being interviewed all across the country as well. He's a pretty good evaluator. He's a great recruiter. I think Georgia's got a few pieces there where people are going to wonder. Everybody keeps wondering every year about who's going to come and pilfer Dell McGee with maybe a bit more money or bigger titles or maybe even a head job somewhere. Or, I think a lot of folks on this panel, I can remember Mike kind of being Jerry Maguire for Dan Lanning about he didn't know how many years that Georgia would have the services of a quality coordinator, a quality coach like Dan Lanning as well. And I mean, you just see a lot of pieces because this is the time the pieces could move on, especially guys that have already gotten a little bit of resume and also gotten a couple of years now at Georgia, putting together some pretty good things.
Connor, what do you think?
Yeah, there's still a lot to be circled out. And Jeff's point about the NFL jobs is really interesting because it sounds like Mullen, if he goes to the NFL, if he doesn't, he comes back at Florida, he might not be at Florida for a whole lot longer with the way things are sort of simmering there. And obviously the Matt Hayes piece that came out earlier this week, what the NFL chooses to do. And you saw last year, Carolina hires Matt Rule. Matt Rule brings Joe Brady with him from LSU. Joe Brady's getting interviewed for head coaching jobs. I think with the way offenses have changed in college or at the college football level nowadays and how they've informed and innovated at the NFL level, teams are going to start looking at say, a Dan Mullen to bring him in as a head coach at the next level where he's not having to run recruiting. And so he doesn't necessarily have to worry about that or, worry about packing the swamp and being as much of a CEO for the franchise as much as he has to be at the college level. So how that all shakes out is going to be really interesting. As Jeff points out, we'll have, I think, a huge effect on where things go and shake out the rest of the coaching carousel, so to speak.
Jeff, Christy, go ahead.
Brandon, is your worst absolute nightmare Dan Mullen as the coach of the Atlanta Falcons and then Hugh Freeze coming from Liberty to coach the Florida Gators? Is that your worst absolute 2021 nightmare? Or does it get worse than that?
No, that'd be about as bad as it could be. I would not root for the Falcons if Dan Mullen was the coach. I just simply wouldn't. If Hugh Freeze came to Florida, that kind of stink. I don't want Hugh Freeze to the north in Knoxville. I don't want him to the south in Gainesville. I didn't want him to the west in Auburn. I think Hugh Freeze is a pretty effective coach, and I want to keep him. I like the idea of Hugh Freeze coaching in Lynchburg, Virginia. Let me just put it that way, somewhere that's not quite, going to be too much of a thorn in my side all the way around. But Jeff, Christie in the comment section asking about some of the stuff that's been kind of popping up online this week about Will Muschamp. What can you tell us about some of the rumblings and grumblings regarding the status of Will Muschamp, who, according to CBS, turned down the Texas defensive coordinator job a little earlier this week and is obviously unemployed now because of the fact that South Carolina moved on from him?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be ignorant to those rumblings. I've heard a lot of rumblings too. I hear a lot of stuff. You think, first of all, I don't think Carolina gave Will Muschamp a no-compete because, remember, he never even signed that contract. Remember, there was a lot of discussion about what exactly, it'd been a period of time where he didn't even sign the extension. I don't think there was a no-compete loaded into that. And, we all know this. Here's the common thread is, Jackson Muschamp, his son, is a walk-on quarterback at Georgia. What's to say that Will Muschamp becomes an analyst, becomes a consultant, becomes a part of the Georgia program in some small way? While maybe he's allowed to do that because of that great relationship he has with Kirby Smart. And likewise, I mean, I'm sure another defensive mind for Georgia, maybe even if it's only something as small as a consultant basis, would be something that Georgia could obviously take advantage of.
Mike, let me come back to you since you're the one that kind of got the ball rolling on this, and I'll speak as a fan for a moment. There was obviously a lot about Georgia this year that was not perfect, right? You had some defensive breakdowns in the two biggest games the team played, and offense still kind of struggling to find itself. But when I look at the 10 on-field assistants for Georgia, there's not a single one of them that I would say definitely needs to be replaced. Now, I don't know that any of them are actually irreplaceable either, but in my mind, there's not a single assistant coach on the Georgia coaching staff right now that I think it's imperative they be replaced, even after a year like this, which Georgia probably didn't, certainly not probably, definitely didn't match its beginning of the year expectations. I don't know that I put the blame on any assistant coach for that.
Well, no, and I agree with you because I think that a lot, I think Kirby Smart was very involved this year, and it's, because of the recruiting restrictions. I think the head coach, was in all those rooms. I don't think I'd put it just on Dan Lanning. I'd put it on Kirby Smart too. And let's be honest, this Georgia team is one injury riddled Kentucky game away from going back to the SEC championship. You know, I really believe that if Jordan, and I know nobody likes ifs and buts, but with Jordan Davis, if they play Florida before they play Kentucky, they probably beat them. If we're being honest about it, remember Florida had a 2-week
Stetson
break.
Bennett a quarterback?
If with Richard LeCount and Jordan Davis and a healthy Stetson Bennett, I do think the shoulder injury was a factor. I mean, remember he suffered a sprained shoulder when they were up 14-0 on the second drive, and he actually threw a pretty good pass. Had he called the right protection, he wouldn't have gotten hit. But yes, I think if you put Jordan Davis out there and Richard LeCount and a healthy Stetson Bennett, I think it's a different game because I think Richard LeCount is an eraser. I think he's a guy that I don't think they get 200 yards on the wheel route with number 2 out there. I think he's the guy that makes the adjustments instead of Kirby having to wait until halftime. So I think the injuries played a large role, as they do every season with every team. And all you got to do is look at Florida's bowl game or look at Georgia's game with 5 starters out and how close Cincinnati played the Bulldogs. But to answer your question, BA, about the coaches, if they move on defense, I don't think it would be because they need a change. I do think offensively there could be changes, though, because you've got a new coordinator and Todd Monken knows what he wants from different position groups. And so therefore I could see there being 1 or 2 changes. As for Will Muschamp, I'll say this. He is a media darling, and if you've dealt with him, you know why. He's a wonderful interview. He's a very intelligent man. He's a gifted speaker, but he's got a lot of guys leaking a lot of bad information about how great he is and how many job offers he gets. They did the same thing when he got fired at Florida. All you heard from some of the national talking heads was what a great coach he was. And if we're going to be honest, he really isn't that accomplished when you look at the opportunities that he had. Now, he did beat Georgia last year. But outside of that, I look at Will Muschamp as a guy that's had one opportunity after another opportunity after another opportunity who does not seem to exceed the expectations. So as a head coach, could he be done? Perhaps. Could he be hired by Georgia? Absolutely. He was the guy that helped Kirby get in the business. He's a like-minded coach. I think that Kirby would add to the staff. And as Jeff referenced, his son not only plays quarterback, but he's played in the secondary as well on the scout team. So maybe groom his son for a future coaching position.
So let's move. Go ahead, Jeff. But let's go ahead and move into topic number 3 about some of the SEC coaching moving that's been going on, and we'll use Muschamp as the springboard for all of that. So, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I'll say, if I remember correctly, of course, Muschamp at Carolina, Muschamp at Florida, those are not positive, bullet point top of your resume jobs. But you got to remember, I think he was the national assistant coach of the year maybe when he was at Auburn. I don't know if he was also
not
at
Auburn.
Texas.
He did not have a good year at Auburn in 2015.
He was the coach in waiting at Texas. And if you look at Will Muschamp strictly as a D coordinator, strictly as a play caller, strictly as a guy that works the unit and doesn't do the CEO stuff, I think the track record and resume and skill set there is still pretty strong.
I'm not sure I agree with your police work there, Jeff, because if you gave me the choice of the defensive coordinators kind of on the open market, and listen, it's weird. I've actually touted Muschamp as a head coach. I've been wrong every time I've done it, but I've actually been kind of a believer that he might figure things out as a head coach. It has not happened. But as a defensive coordinator, I'll take Kevin Steele as a DC over Will Muschamp, and I'll definitely take Derek Mason as a defensive coordinator over Will Muschamp. So of the kind of big-name defensive coordinators in the open market, Muschamp would be no better than third best on the open market.
Well, I wasn't comparing him to the open market there. I'm not going to disagree with any of your points there about Mason or Muschamp or Kevin Steele or Muschamp. That's a different story for another day. I'm just looking at, I think Will Muschamp's greatest worth and his greatest success at the college level, you have to say it's been as a defensive coordinator working that specific side of the ball. And I think that's the point there. The thing that you bring up with Mason, though, is I think it's important, Brandon, because how in the world are you going to compete with Nick Saban while he's still on the mountaintop at Alabama, coming down with 2 stone tablets every year in Tuscaloosa. Well, here's how you do it. You get a lot of guys that have known the league and that have been around the league and can recruit a little bit, especially with an outsider coming in from Boise State. When you start adding a Mike Bobo, a Will Friend, and a Derek Mason to an Auburn staff, you got some SEC chops there at least that sort of legitimizes the hire because they'll have a staff around him.
Yeah, let's talk about that, Connor. I do think the Derek Mason hire is really impressive. I think the Mike Bobo hire is pretty impressive on the Auburn side of this. I will say that on the Bobo side, I'm not quite so sure taking this job was his best professional decision. I think he had more job security had he stayed at South Carolina. My guess is they have to stay with Shane Beamer for at least a couple of years. My guess is Beamer would have to stay with Bobo for at least some of that time there as well. So I'm not so sure it was a great decision on Bobo's part to go to Auburn, even though most people would say Auburn is the better job. But certainly Brian Harsin looks pretty shrewd here by hiring these SEC names to join him there at Auburn, even if Will Friend's another guy that didn't really have a great year last year.
Well, so I'll push back actually on Bobo at South Carolina. If things don't go well right away next year, it reminds me maybe a little bit of the Tracy Rocker situation at Georgia, where he was a holdover from the previous staff, but the sort of way things ended with the previous administration and regime, it sort of continued. And there were some things that came out in the bowl practice that he was not exactly well liked. And even some player comments today, I know Marshawn Lattimore, who's involved in an off-field role there at South Carolina, was revealed that he was not all that happy with Bobo and how he's reacted since this. So I don't necessarily know if I agree on that South Carolina part.
Well, let me just stop you for 1 second. Well, I'll let you finish your point. Let me stop you for 1 second. You've seen The Sopranos, right? Okay, so at the last season, Paulie, one of the great characters, Tony tries to give him a promotion, and Paulie says no because Ralphie Cifaretto and Richie Aprile and
ruined the show for me. I was planning on watching it soon.
I'm sorry, but a lot of the guys who had that job previous, it didn't really end so well for them.
Yeah.
So Paulie said, I don't want that job. If you look at that, I know it's a different head coach now, but Auburn offensive coordinator has just been the place where offensive coordinator careers kind of go to, I'm really not quite so sure what. It's just not really been a good run. And if you're Bobo, you've got a 5-star quarterback waiting in the wings in Columbia. You got job security galore there. His last job prior to this at Colorado State, who really knows what went on with all of that. Sometimes there's just something to be said for staying put. But Connor, go ahead and finish your point.
Yeah, so my question about Harsin and Jeff Commit, I know Mason is well-respected. I know Bobo is well-respected. I'm interested to see how he fills out some of these position coaches that he has to hire, because as good as Bobo is and as good as Mason are as coaches, they're still not, to me, the slam dunk recruiting hires that you need at Auburn to sort of really go out there and win and make a difference. Because the big difference for me with Malzahn and the end of his tenure, they sort of stopped getting those Derek Brown type, Marlon Davidson type players. And I think that's a big reason why they couldn't necessarily compete and win with ease against the also-rans, as opposed to also having to match up with Georgia, Alabama, and LSU. So I know Travis Williams, I believe, is the linebacker coach there. He's very well regarded. I think keeping him back on staff would be big. Rodney Gardner, anyone who knows anything, he is a very well regarded defensive line coach. I think if Auburn can find, and Harsin could find a way to retain him. While yes, Bobo and Mason certainly have their chops, and they do bring SEC experience to Harsin's staff, which is a big thing to check off. I still have some questions about whether or not they're going to be able to recruit well enough under Harsin to sort of make the difference that these Auburn administrators want by moving on from Gus Malzahn.
I think it's a very fair point. Mike, while we're on the subject of SEC coaching drama, I got to ask you, because you know the town well, what in the holy heck is going on in Knoxville right now? To be honest with you, I had either not been following this story as closely as I should have been, or a lot of this kind of stuff was happening very quietly under the radar for as long as it possibly could. But this NCAA stuff and the allegations against Jeremy Pruitt are either being used to push Pruitt out the door, or it's such a problem they have to move him out the door. Boy, it certainly seems like Jeremy Pruitt's status as Tennessee's head coach is tenuous at best. Am I exaggerating by saying that?
I think that's fair. I mean, they've got some positions that they've frozen right now, and they're not hiring at a time in the recruiting process when you really need to be shaping yourself up for February. I mean, I remember, boy, what a difference a year makes, right? A year ago, Tennessee finishes the season on a 6-game winning streak. They jump out front on recruiting and have the number 2 class. I say publicly that they're going to finish probably where they always finish before it's all said and done. And I get tarred and feathered on Twitter because I'm so foolish as to not recognize that the Vols are back And here we are, and now the program's in ruins once again. Essentially, there's an NCAA investigation going on. They held out their talented running back Eric Gray out of the bowl game. There's reports that perhaps another recruit now at Georgia was involved in some potential improprieties that are being checked into. They've hired a law firm to investigate. I mean, this has all the markings of an NCAA issue and a potential coaching change, potential show cause. But we don't know yet, right?
But it also has all the markings, Mike, of Tennessee weaponized. I mean, listen, I hate to sound like this, but it almost comes across, if you read the stuff that's out there, you listen to the people who do the radio interviews and stuff, it almost sounds like to me that Tennessee is weaponized in the NCAA investigation to get rid of a coach they don't like.
Well, that could happen, but I've been there before, and I watched Lane Kiffin commit lack of institutional control by paying for hostesses to attend a prospect's football game and recruit, knowingly paying. It was a flat-out lack of institutional control, and somehow Tennessee dodged a bullet, and Lane Kiffin's back coaching in the SEC despite a egregious, number of violations. I remember doing a story on the most secondary violations in 2009, and it was Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin. And it wasn't close, and the message was, it's worth it, right? It's worth it. Ole Miss and the success they had with Hugh Freeze, as much guilt as they assumed, don't think for a minute that they wouldn't do it again to win. They had their moments of glory. Hugh Freeze we're talking about him being back in the SEC. So the message, if you're a big enough dog, you can ask North Carolina basketball or Syracuse basketball, or most recently Mike Krzyzewski. If you're a big enough dog, you can cheat and get away with it because you help fund the NCAA and help fund the product. So I'm not convinced in this day and age of anything. A coach can be caught cheating and maintain his job. I think there's examples of that, like I said, in college basketball as well as college football. But I would say, to your point, that if they do find some reasons and cause for fire, that would certainly make it easier to replace Jeremy Pruitt and reduce the $15 million buyout and get rid of him quicker. But you would think that Hugh Freeze, or why not Luke Fickell for that matter, could be a couple of guys Tennessee could look at.
Jeff, I know you saw the piece from Matt Hayes at Saturday Down South this week that also was a scathing takedown of Dan Mullen. Now, listen, I'm here for every minute of that. I loved all of it. But you don't see a lot of this where somebody within the Florida program, it certainly appears, was willing to really, go after Mullen for some of the things that he said, for Florida's own NCAA issues right now, the show cause penalty they got related to the bump rule involving the dude that was up in Washington. What'd you make of all that?
I think it was a structured piece. You called it a takedown. I learned some things in that piece. I did not know that, every year in the SEC, folks, to survive in recruiting, you get your contract extended by at least 1 year, where you can go into a home and you can say, hey guys, I'm going to be here. I have a 5-year deal for as long as it takes your son to be in there. I'm going to be his head coach. I didn't know for the last 2 years that Mullen didn't get that extra year on his deal added on. Now, I don't know if he initially signed a 7-year contract or what he would have signed. I don't think he signed a Jimbo Fisher size deal, but I think that was interesting. And I also thought the fact that you got to remember that 1984 roots of the program, man, where Arnsberger came in as AD after, I think, the time when Galen Hall was there, and they were skirting some violations. I think in 1984 they were on probation. Maybe had a team good enough to play for it all, and they tried to clean that up under Spurrier. They cleaned all that up. They didn't have to cheat to win. That point was made in the story. And now not only is Mullen looking at a show cause, and now they're looking at a probationary aspect, but man, I don't know how he did it, but he won up 3 very black eye moments for the university last year. That was in terms of the Texas A&M game, the optics for the COVID situation, how he kind of teased the fact that A&M skirted the rule about the number of fans. Then what he did in the Darth Vader thing, and then how totally embarrassing he was, scathing his team after the Cotton Bowl, disrespecting the Cotton Bowl, saying that, my team played 11 days ago. And that just cuts the legs out of everything positive you would try to do. And then I think he brings in a guy like Todd Grantham and keeps him there. And, to me, a lot of people I know in the circles, the recruiting circles, trainers, scouts, coaches, high school coaches, they're like, hold on a second. How in the world are you firing the safeties coach, and the cornerbacks coach, when those two guys have NFL experience, they're well liked, they've been around forever, at least Torian Green has. Those are good men, good football coaches. But somebody's got to get run over when the defense is at sieve and they give up all those passing touchdowns. I hear a lot of things from some trainers and scouts and high school coaches out there that Florida's not a good place to be if you're a defensive back, because Grantham runs the show. Grantham calls all the shots. And so he's returning. And so that's another thing about Florida's momentum that's kind of upside down. And Brendan, I got to get this point in. You were mentioning the Sopranos. It made me laugh. It made me think of it. Let's go back to the Sopranos and look at the Auburn coaching staff. Now let's listen to this. We got Mike Bobo. We got Will Friend there. There's rumors now of the Cadillac Williams running back job. It's Brian McClendon might be interviewed and looked at for the running backs job.
He was out west this past year, right?
Yeah, I think he was in Oregon, I think. But
yeah,
if you look at that, Brandon, what is that? 3 members of a Mark Richt coaching staff right there. And that was 2012, 2013 or something like that. That's turning the clock back a little bit right there. I don't know if that's the recipe Auburn needs, but they're going to try with some diehards in the SEC.
Honesty compels me to admit it was not the recipe for George, as it turns out. Connor, you got a final thought on any of this stuff?
Yeah, I'll sum up. Mike was being much more diplomatic about the Jeremy Pruitt situation because, he's the veteran reporter, the true professional. I'll sum this up quite frankly. Tennessee's trying to figure out a way to fire Jeremy Pruitt and not have to pay him for it. I think it is just that clear cut. They're trying to grease the wheels. A friend of ours, Ben Wolk, pointed out on Twitter, hiring freeze. That feels a little too on the nose, given what could be out there. So I think Tennessee is trying to grease the wheels, whether it be now or after this coming 2021 season. And I will say, Tennessee did land a quarterback commitment today from Virginia Tech, Hendon Hooker, which, why would you bring him in if you think you have Harrison Bailey as your guy or Brian Maurer? So I think the writing is very much on the wall for Jeremy Pruitt's tenure there at Tennessee.
Another very overused joke on Twitter today was the transfer's last name and how it could potentially be a relation to a proclivity of Hugh Freeze's as well. I'll let people do the math on that on their own. Topic number 4, let's do this quick because I do want to take a couple comments before we get out of here. National championship game on Monday, Alabama, Ohio State. Mike, what do you think happens?
A lot of points, 4-quarter game. I think the Buckeyes match up well. I think it's going to be on Justin Fields' shoulders to make some good decisions, to make some big plays in the clutch. The auspicious moment has arrived. This time he won't be doing it in a fake punt formation. He'll be trying to do it for 4 quarters. And speaking of freeze, we'll see if he freezes up again or if he's ready to be the hero.
Well, I certainly thought he looked like a hero in the semifinal game the other day, but I do think it's hard to replicate that kind of performance 2 games in a row, especially with the uncertain status of his health. And frankly, I'm not really quite sure what Ohio State has beyond Justin Fields, with apologies to Trey Sermon. I know they're certainly very deep at the wide receiver spot, but if Fields doesn't have a huge game, I don't see how Ohio State keeps pace with Alabama, and I don't know that you can play as well 2 games in a row as what Fields did against Clemson. From that standpoint, that's why I think Alabama is certainly the safe pick here in this game. And I'm not going to change my mind about Alabama just because I was surprised by how well Ohio State played against Clemson. So I'll go Alabama on this side of things. Mike, do you want to jump back in?
Honesty compels me to ask you, Brandon, were you not surprised that Florida was able to move the ball as effectively as they were against the Crimson Tide?
Yeah, I guess so. And maybe I should factor that into my evaluation, but I'm just kind of not. It's like a lot of, back when you had college class or something, you throw out the highest score, you throw out the low score, and you just kind of go with what's left over. I'm going to sort of lob that off for Alabama as the outlier. I mean, frankly, I thought Florida played pretty well against Alabama, and I got to give them credit for that, but I'm not really quite sure what it means necessarily. So, from that standpoint, I feel pretty safe picking Alabama in this game. Connor, what do you think about the game?
Yeah, so one real nerdy football thing, the strength of Ohio State's defense are their defensive tackles. Landon Dickerson's not going to play in this game.
Yeah.
He was named the Remington Award winner tonight, best center in college football. I'll be interested to see what impact that has on this game. But, I mean, to me, it just comes down to the next person I see stop, Devontae Smith, is the first that's going to do it all season. He's the best player in college football. I think he's going to have a huge night against Sean Wade, who has not been very good this year. In that Ohio State secondary, I think Mike's right. There's going to be a ton of points in this game. I expect Ohio State to move the ball. I'll be really interested to see how Garrett Wilson versus Josh Jobe matches up, because I think they're going to put Patrick Surtain on Chris Olave, and they really, really, really need Garrett Wilson, I think, to have a big game for Ohio State to win. But I've been printing so many Alabama national title T-shirts for weeks now. I can't back out now. While I think Ohio State might be able to make this a game and keep it in it for a while, I wouldn't be surprised if it plays out like last year's Alabama-Clemson game, where in the second half, Alabama just overwhelms Ohio State and they roll to another victory there. So give me the Crimson Tide to win a national title.
Jeff, what do you think?
I think areas where every area that I think Ohio State is really good and really strong and capable of excellent play, I just think Alabama is so much, it's just a little notch better, another tier better in all those areas. I think, folks, I don't know if people are going to start talking about this now or after the bowl game, but when you think about the coronavirus, you think about moving out Tua, moving in Mac Jones, you think about losing 2 first-round receivers, you think about all SEC schedule, you think about all these things, 2 separate COVID tests for their head coach and COVID scares for their head coach. I think this might go down as Nick Saban's best work and maybe his best team in Tuscaloosa when you think about the offensive line. You think about what they've done against an all-SEC schedule, the prolific numbers they've put up, Najee Harris, that offensive line. And I'm sure this is an eyebrow-raising statement, but I still think about how great they are right now. And then you take out maybe a top 15 talent in Jalen Waddle out of that offense as well. You take Landon Dickerson out of that offense, who is the Remington Award winner, and the team just keeps chugging along. I think it is a roll tide type, one of the signature moments of the Saban dynasty at Alabama. I think Ohio State will play well. I think they will put up a lot of points, but I think Alabama will just be Alabama and roll. And I think this probably might end up being a 14-point game for Alabama. You can't tell me you can stop all those pieces when Mac Jones, you want to talk about jet pilots, Mike. Mac Jones has been Iceman with Maverick's Moxie in the cockpit this year, man. Wow. I'm extremely impressed with everything Alabama's done this year through degrees of difficulty, whatever you want to say. They keep moving along, and I think Ohio State will try, but I don't think they'll be able to keep up with the Tide.
Can I rebut that, please?
By all means, Mike. By all means.
Thank you. I mean, let's be honest here. If you put Mac Jones on Ohio State's team and Justin Fields on Alabama's team, we're not even talking about a contest. You know, Mac Jones is the benefactor of having a great supporting cast. You saw how mortal he looked on the opening series when Georgia hit him. And for all these people, I don't know about you guys, but you cover Georgia, you become a target for the last 40 years of their inability to win. And I've only covered the team 3 years. People think I graduated from here or something. I didn't. I cover the team. I've got respect for the team, but all this garbage about the difference between Alabama and Georgia, and everybody's getting amnesia and forgetting that Georgia led Alabama 24-20 at halftime with Stetson at quarterback. And again, I'm not, Stetson was, he was an adequate SEC quarterback, but to beat Alabama, it would have taken special. Still, it's 24-20 in Tuscaloosa. Georgia's not that far off from Alabama, even in a year when Alabama had all these players, like Najee Harris, like Outland Trophy winner Alex Leatherwood, like Heisman Trophy winner Devontae Smith. These are all guys that could have sailed off to the NFL, and they came around another year. You take those guys away, and we're not having this conversation. Alabama's not playing in this game. And here we are sitting now, and we know, I feel like we know a secret. Jordan Davis coming back. JT Daniels coming back, James Cook coming back. Now it's Georgia that has these great players that are returning. So there'll be another offseason of target practice on Georgia fans for having optimism. How dare they, even though they've played in the SEC championship game 3 of the last 4 years, and quite frankly, been 1 or 2 plays away from beating Alabama. So I'm growing a little tired of people trying to rain on the Georgia parade. I did notice there's news, and I'll have a story up in a moment, Mark Webb going pro. I mean, great guy, but I don't think anybody's going to drop Georgia's national championship hopes or SEC championship hopes without Mark Webb on the roster. It's a surprising move frankly. I think Mark could have used another year. But the important players, Jordan Davis, James Cook, JT Daniels, Devontae Wyatt, Jeff mentioned Justin Schaefer earlier. That's interesting. That's an interesting one to me. But I think George is really on the right on the verge of doing something. I think they'll definitely win the East. Don't think Mullen's going anywhere. I would bet Georgia 2-1 to win the East, and I would give them 50-50 odds of winning the SEC championship game next year.
All right, so let's do this. Let's switch over to our cover more here. We've touched on our cover 4. How about cover more? We'll take a couple of comments. We still have some time left on Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau here this evening. A lot of folks weighing in on the topics of the day. Chad Buchanan, by the way, Jeff mentioning Terry and Arnold. What do you think the outlook looks like for Arnold right now?
Let's see. So he's playing a lot of basketball right now. I think that he's waiting to see what's happening with those Florida hires. In terms of who they're going to bring in to kind of repair the relationship really fast. I think it's Auburn and Georgia. I think Georgia, the more guys that go on to the NFL to play in Roger Goodell's league, I think that really helps Georgia's case. He already told me when Nugget Warren moved on and didn't decide to sign to the class, he already felt it was instant playing time already. And that was before Stokes and that was before Campbell. I'm sure he'd been briefed on kind of what those guys were already thinking about regardless. But he's really a special defensive back. Now, there's somebody in the thread in our forum.dognation.com. I value all the opinions, but somebody in our thread said this might be one of the most skilled, versatile defensive backs to come to Georgia. They feel that is their opinion since Champ Bailey. And boy, I had to put that one on the scale and think about that. Now, I don't know if it's totally accurate, but I think it's only a couple of blocks away from that sort of hyperbole right there. The reason why I say this, people forget this. Champ was so stinking fast. He was one of those guys. He's got a gold jacket now because but he started out his time at Georgia as a safety and playing back in the secondary and then worked his way up to being a press corner. You see him make all those great plays against Peyton Manning. And, Terrion is a very confident, very athletic football player. But I've seen him do things on a high school field with my own eyes that are just special. And like I've said a couple of times, when Kirby Smart, this is according to Terrion, of course, he says that he's mentioned Jim Thorpe Award and he's mentioned Heisman finalist to Terrion Arnold as he's been recruiting him. I've never heard Kirby, the words out of a recruit's mouth, Kirby, say these things. And everybody says, yeah. That's what they all say. No, Georgia never said this to Tyson Campbell. They never said this to Eric Stokes. They never said this to Tyreek Stevenson. They never said this to Keely Ringo. So that's why I think this young man is very special and would be a great fitting piece of the 2021 recruiting class.
Connor, we're running low on time here. Christy wants to know about Zamir White. What do you think about Zamir White's status for the upcoming season?
Georgia has always had 5 scholarship running backs under Kirby Smart. Right now, they are at exactly 5 scholarship running backs. I think he's a guy who, yes, he makes Georgia better if he comes back next year, but it's going to be a heavy room for carries. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Elijah Holyfield. And look, Zamir, for all the complaints fans seem to have out there about running backs, he's going to make it in the NFL because he does all the little things perfectly well. He is by far Georgia's best pass blocker. And as great as Kenny McIntosh was late in that game on third down, he struggled in pass protection against Cincinnati in that game. As special teams, fantastic special teams player, had a block punt this year for Georgia, was instrumental in a lot of big returns for Kearis Jackson as well. He's a guy, if he goes to the NFL next year, he's a guy we know has the physical ability to go there and be an NFL player. And he does all the behind the scenes stuff that is going to allow him to stick around and make it in the league. So if he does go, it's great for him. I wish him nothing but success, especially with sort of the cursed beginning he had his career. But if he chooses to come back as well, look, that's another reason to be excited next year. And he makes Georgia's team better with him back.
Mike, I know you're topping the story, but Chris Slim White wants to know about some of these young offensive tackles, guys like Broderick Jones. I'd add Tate Ratledge into that discussion as well. How ready do you think they could be to push and compete for playing time next season?
I think they're counting on Broderick Jones. I think he's got to add some weight. I know he was highly rated in the action that he saw, albeit South Carolina's defensive line wasn't the most challenging, but he's got great feet. He's got great technique, and he's going to have a full off season. So I would be surprised if it wasn't Broderick Jones starting at left tackle. And, Xavier Truss kind of had his audition against Cincinnati, and it didn't go real well, honestly. The Rhode Island prospect, no Rhode Island jokes here. But I will say I do expect Broderick Jones. Tate Ratledge, I'm not real sure. I'll defer to Jeff on that. I know Tate coming in was a guy, a 5-star. Kirby warned us on signing day when we were all, 5 stars. These guys could play. And Kirby made it pretty clear he didn't expect either to play, and neither one really did play. Jeff, how ready do you think Tate Ratledge could be, and where could we see him compete? Because some of these other guys, Salyer at left guard, if I got Broderick at left tackle, Salyer at left guard, you wonder if Erickson can hold on at center. By the way, I think he's the third guy at media day. Kirby sends him out every other interview session. Then you look at the right tackle, Warren McClendon, a likely freshman All-American. And then could potentially that right guard spot be open?
Jeff, I'll give you the last word.
I think Tate to me looks like a splash player in his redshirt freshman year, much like Cade Mays was early on at Georgia. I think he's going to make a home as a guard tackle hybrid, more on the guard. I just don't think he has the length to be a great right tackle. Going to be physical, though. Going to be chippy brain and going to be playing to the edge of the whistle. Going to be trying to have a little nasty streak and pummel guys. Always been a big fan of Tate Ratledge, former high school punter as well. A big guy like that. I think the names on the Georgia's offensive line are going to get very interesting. Again, I see it upgrades as Georgia maybe goes from the aircraft carriers that Sam Pittman preferred that still had one more year because they were experienced on the 2020 team to more of the battleships, which is what Matt Luke prefers. Getting a little bit more athletic, getting that screen game going, getting back there on the edge a little bit more. Folks, you got to mention Big Amarius Mims, man. I mean, he's like an eclipse. He's going to dominate a lot of the offensive line questions from those grizzled beat writers like Mike Griffith and everybody else there on the Georgia beat. They're going to want to know about Amarius because he's 6'9", 320 and moves like a gazelle sometimes. Gets to that second level, works to that second level. You're going to have to give him a look because he looks like Zeus and Atlas got together and said, let's chisel us out a first-round offensive tackle. The offensive line future of Georgia is very, very bright. So bright that I don't even know what they really need in the 2020 recruiting cycle in terms of replenishments, because they've had guys like Clay Webb, Cedric Von Prawn, Chad Lindbergh, another All-American. Brandon, you got to mention Chad Lindbergh's name.
Yeah.
Tate Ratledge. You got Warren McClendon, who has at least 2 more years at Georgia as well. And then you got Broderick. You got Amarius. Great googly moogly Micah Morris. You got a state heavyweight wrestling champion coming in and Dylan Fairchild. You got Jared Wilson, a guy that I think is one of the most underrated guys in the class. I don't really know what the needs are for Georgia's offensive line. This Georgia offensive line is so strong and so stacked coming back.
Well, I do know what the need for Cover 4 Live presented by Georgia Farm Bureau is. It's to say goodbye because we've taken up enough of everybody's time this evening. Jeff, great analysis there. Connor Riley, Mike Griffith, all of you as well. Hope you all have a great evening. We'll see you back here very soon for our program once again. Jeff will join me tomorrow for Dog Nation Daily. Can't wait for that. A bunch of great stuff coming on the website from both Connor Riley and Mike Griffith. Mike actually made a special Thursday appearance on Dog Nation Daily today, so go back and check out today's show if you haven't seen that already. Thanks to all of you for being here. We'll see you very soon here on Dog Nation. Stay close to all the platforms in the days ahead because there is a bunch of news as we head towards the end of the week throughout the weekend. We'll cover it for you right here on Dog Nation and see you very soon here on the Dog Nation video channels for Cover 4 Live presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. Have a great night, everybody.